Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to Be Bold America. I'm your host, Jill Cody, along with my co-host, Dr. Pettis Perry. Hey, Pettis, we have a special guest today that I know both of us are really looking forward to speaking with. Someone who has his radio show on KSQD 90.7 every day, found right here at 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. And that's Thom Hartmann. Pettis? Do we have you? I don't hear Pettis, Emily. Well, I'll just keep going then. Thom, I'm going to start by introducing your topic. Are you there? Do I have you?
I am here.
Hey.
Hi, Jill. Hey, Doc.
Hi, Thom. Pettis, we're still trying to look for Pettis here. Well, we're going to get him. Emily will get him. So, Thom, I'm going to introduce your topic. Our program today is discussing Thom Hartmann's new book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Our interview with him will reveal how the government and corporate America misuse our personal data and how we can reclaim it. Most Americans are worried about how companies like Facebook invade their privacy and harvest their data, but many don't understand fully the details of how their information is being adapted and misused. We will learn from Thom how Big Brother invented whiteness to keep power, how the surveillance industry is booming, how democracy requires trust, and how authoritarianism requires fear. We have big things to do. Thom Hartmann is a 4-time winner of the Project Censor Award, a New York Times bestselling author of at least 33 books, and America's #1 progressive talk radio show host. His show is syndicated on local for-profit and nonprofit stations on Broadcast Nation and worldwide. He is also simulcast on television into nearly 60 million U.S. and Canadian homes. Hello, Thom. Welcome back to Be Bold America.
Well, thank you, Jill. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's just an honor to have you. And also your book I read to cover, and again, you've done a brilliant book. Your Hidden History series just really is concise and finds information that you, as you say, is hidden, but it is little-known facts. And I know Pettis and I will be delighted to talk to you about it. Pettis, do we have you now? Nope. Okay. Is he calling in? Okay, I'll keep going. Pettis and I will be delighted to talk to you when I can get him on the show about how many people are making fortunes for themselves off of, well, us. So, Thom, do we have a right to privacy?
Well, yes and no. It's interesting to start with the word privacy. The word privacy does not appear in any of our founding documents.
Really?
With one single exception. Yeah. In fact, I did a digital search. Now, all of the writings of most of the founders have now been, digitized. Mm-hmm. And so I searched through everything that Alexander Hamilton ever wrote, everything that Thomas Jefferson ever wrote, everything John Adams wrote, everything Thomas Paine wrote. I mean, everything. And I found one reference, and that was in Federalist number 69, and it was Alexander Hamilton, and he was complaining about how the governor of New York was selected in private by 3 cronies, essentially. And so privacy back then meant something quite different. It meant something surreptitious. It meant something kind of nasty. And in fact, back at that time, we didn't have bathrooms. In fact, the bathtub was, didn't move into the bathroom until we got indoor plumbing and water heater systems, which was, at the turn of the 20th century. And typically we didn't have toilets in there. I mean, that was popularized by Thomas Crapper in the 1860s. So in the 1770s, when somebody wanted to go outside and use the outhouse, they would say, "Excuse me, I need a moment of privacy." And the outhouse was referred to as the privy because it was where you had your privacy. And that was what the word meant. It meant either using the toilet or doing something sneaky. And so the founders and framers just didn't think that was something that needed to be in the Constitution. So instead, we find the right to privacy all over the Bill of Rights. The First Amendment, you not only have a right to speak, but you also have a right not to speak, which is also echoed in the Fifth Amendment. The Third Amendment, you have the right not to have your home invaded by soldiers, not to have to quarter soldiers. The Fourth Amendment, of course, the right to be secure in your person's papers and things in your home. And arguably the Ninth Amendment kind of saying, whatever rights the government didn't take belong to the people. So those are the, there is sort of a right to privacy in our founding documents in that context, but it wasn't called privacy back then. And it wasn't even acknowledged by the Supreme Court. There were a couple of cases in the 1920s that brought some strong dissents arguing that there should be a right to privacy. But the first time it was explicitly litigated was 1961. And in this 1961 case, forgive me, I'm forgetting the name of it, but in
was
that case...
Poe versus Ullman, or was that...
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
It was, yeah.
All right.
Poe. Yeah, that was, and it had to do with the Connecticut law that said that it was illegal to own or possess, even if you were married, birth control, any kind of birth control. You couldn't have a condom. You couldn't have, and birth control pills were legalized in 1961, which was part of the impetus to challenge this law. But the Supreme Court in 61 in Poe v. Ullman just said, tough luck. If Connecticut doesn't want people to have condoms in their house in married couples, then they're not going to have them. That got revisited 4 years later in oh man, what was the case in 1960? Cunningham versus Connecticut? No, not Cunningham. Anyhow, in another case, v. Connecticut, in 65, Griswold v. Connecticut. And in that case, the Supreme Court actually said, okay, married couples can have condoms in their bedroom without going to jail, but unmarried people can't. So it was still a crime in Connecticut right up until 1972, when the Supreme Court ruled on this a third time and said unmarried people can also possess birth control pills or condoms, or back then there was diaphragms as well. And that kind of set up the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision that used this right of privacy that was discovered over the previous 8 years or so by the Supreme Court, that used that right of privacy to establish that at least until a zygote became viable, or a fetus, whatever you want to call it, became viable outside the body, it was really the woman's privacy, or a woman's right to make her own decision about whether to get an abortion or not. And of course, that's being challenged right now. But
well, was that William Douglas? Was that William Douglas, where he said that we had an implicit zone of privacy that became the foundation of Roe v. Wade?
Yeah, you're talking back in 1928.
Yeah.
Was that the Olmsted case, as I recall? It's been a year since I wrote the book, and I don't have it right in front of me. I'm sorry.
Well, there was one justice that just said that implicitly we had a zone of privacy that did become the foundation of Roe v. Wade. But also Justice Brandeis said in Poe versus Ullman, I think we also have a right to be let alone, and that there was most comprehensive of rights. And I don't feel like the Republicans are letting us alone very much when you hear Missouri talking about death penalty for a woman's right to have an abortion. Or your thoughts on that?
Well, Brandeis was complaining. I mean, he lost the case.
I know, yeah.
And so, although it was, like I said, in 73, it was adopted by the Supreme Court in a fairly expansive fashion, which I suspect is going to be dialed back, not just with regard to abortion. I'm expecting this court to start really dialing back privacy rights right across the board. I mean, we've got a couple of people on the court right now who I could only describe as neo-fascists.
Yes.
And it's not a good moment for American democracy.
Not a good situation, and it's reconciling this right to be let alone, or your right for privacy, or your zone of privacy versus freedom. And they keep talking about freedom, but then taking those freedoms away. That's what's getting me very upset.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we have
Well, it all
Pettis.
depends on how you define freedom, I guess.
I guess freedom for them and not the rest of us. I don't. Pettis, are you there
Yes.
now?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Oh, welcome. Welcome.
Thank you. Thom, you missed a great introduction I gave you, but Jill did well too.
I heard a little bit of it.
But you guys couldn't hear me. I wanted to, I was going to start somewhere else, but you guys, so I want to chime in and talk a little bit about Benjamin Franklin and his thoughts about religion and how religion and Big Brother are intertwined, because I think it fits what you and Jill are discussing now.
There were two times in American history when parts of America, these are both regional, when parts of America devolved into essentially authoritarian police states, when Big Brother really rose up and took over. And the one that most people think of and know of is slavery in the South, and we can get into that. And it wasn't just slavery, it goes way beyond that. The South had ceased to be a democracy by 1845. But the other one was in the Northeast. It was in Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire, where there was basically a theocracy that set up shop in the 1600s and was still, running the show by the time the Constitution was being written. And in fact, Massachusetts almost didn't become a state because of this. But I tell the story in the book. This was, at that time, in that part of the country, you had to pay taxes to the church. You had to show up every Sunday. If you didn't, you could be put in the stocks, or you could be punished, or you could be fined. And there were three women who defied Pastor Hate Evil. Hang on just a second. Let me get his exact. His name was just nuts. I mean, this guy. His first name was Hate Evil, and yeah, I mean, Hate Evil Nutter was his name.
Wow.
Seriously. And he was the pastor of this Protestant church, or this Puritan church, and these young women would not go to church, and they defied him. And so he got the constable of Dover, New Hampshire, to in the dead of winter, to order them tied to the back of a horse cart by their wrists, the three of them, stripped naked to the waist and whipped until bloody. And then they dragged, this was 4 feet of snow on the ground, they dragged them from Dover to through three more towns, in each town stopping to whip them publicly before a constable in a town put a stop to it. But that was the real Big Brother. I mean, that was the thought police. You shall not just speak this way or behave this way, but you must believe this way. And if you fail to do that, then you will suffer serious punishments. And of course, sadly, there are still some people who think that was a good idea. And Ben Franklin, at that time in the early 1700s, he was, in his 80s by the time he became the postmaster general and all that kind of stuff. But he, as a young man, when he was 17 years old, he left Massachusetts specifically for that reason. He was so horrified by this Christian authoritarianism that he moved down to Philadelphia and set up shop as a printer, or became an apprentice to a printer to begin with. But throughout the rest of his life, he was one of the more outspoken voices saying that, you don't want a theocracy here in the United States. I know what it looks like. We need to put a wall of separation between church and state.
Well, just as a side note, I recently saw that on public television, Ken Burns' next film is on Ben Franklin, and starting soon.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's great.
You're listening to Be Bold America on KSQD 90.7 FM, Many Voices, One Station. Listen globally online from the KSQD.org website. We're speaking with the great Thom Hartmann, and our topic today is his newest book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threatened Us and Our Democracy. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Hello, Hello, K-Squid listeners. I'm Thom Hartmann, and each weekday at 4 p.m., I bring you a different perspective on the news than you're likely to hear on most media outlets. Please join me on KSQD Santa Cruz, your ink spot on the dial for the Thom Hartmann program, heard now for the first time ever in the Monterey Bay area at 90.7 FM, weekdays at 4 p.m. That's progressive talking conversation with me, Thom Hartmann, weekdays at 4 p.m. on KSQD 90.7 FM. Tag, you're it.
Today, our topic is the hidden history of Big Brother, and we're speaking with the #1 progressive talk show host and New York Times bestselling author of at least 33 books, Thom Hartmann. Learn more by visiting thomhartmann.com or Twitter at Thom_Hartmann. Now, Thom, is it 33 books? How many books have you written?
Probably 50 or thereabouts.
Oh my gosh!
A few of them, the early ones that I wrote never got published. They were just terrible. Arthur C. Clarke once said, "Your first million words are practice," and I can testify to that. That's how you learn to write. Is you write a lot of terrible stuff.
You write and write. Well, the first segment of the show we were talking about history, but I'd like to get into the applications of today about how it's threatening us and our democracy. So how are search engine companies get to track us when we install an app, or the computer hardware companies get to track us, or even the Facebook and Google? It seems to be the point that it's almost unstoppable now.
Well, it is and it isn't. I mean, it's a business model. And I think it's important to separate the social media folks from the search engine folks from the just run of the mill. We're going to spy on you folks, but we're also going to sell you a thermostat kind of thing. So with regard to because your question was pretty broad.
Yeah, sorry.
With regard to. No, it's all good. It's just a lot of territory. With regard to the search engines, this is Google's business model, is learning absolutely everything they can about every single one of us, sometimes in aggregate, sometimes individually, and then turning that into cash, figuring out a way to sell that. And so, they're a substantial aggregator of our data, and they use a whole variety of online tools to do that. That in and of itself is not bad or criminal or even evil. It could be a little creepy. But, I mean, there are alternatives. DuckDuckGo, for example, which does not...
Which I do. Yes, I do use DuckDuckGo.
And there's space in that marketplace for a company that would offer, just news sites, for example, that you could search and things like that. But that's a whole other conversation. But this business model that came about with regard to search and many of these other things is that there's always been a market for information about consumers. I used to own an advertising agency back in the 90s in Atlanta, and back in the 70s I was a partner in one in Michigan. And if you want to do a mailing piece to try to get people to buy your product, you can buy mailing lists of people who subscribe to certain magazines that might make them more inclined to want your product, or live in a certain part of the country, or are a certain age or a certain income. I mean, that kind of information has always been for sale. Where it's gotten hyper granular is with the advent of the computer starting in the 90s, and then in a big way in the last 20 years, where now you've got some of these companies that are bragging about having compiled 15, 20, 25,000 pieces of data about, an individual consumer. And, they know what you're afraid of. They know what you love. They know, who your pets are. They know what you do. They know when you go to bed. They know when you get up. They know who comes and visits your home. It's just like this whole big business model. And this is out of the smart home stuff, the appliances. This whole model has basically boiled down to selling you to people who want to advertise to you, who want to sell things to you. And we got a huge example of this in 2016 when Cambridge Analytica scraped, they claimed several thousand data points and photographs of 200 million Americans off Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg later came out and said, no, it was only 87 million Americans. and used that data to create hundreds, tens of thousands of variations on individual ads that were micro-customized to sell in 2016 the candidacy of Donald Trump and in 2018 the candidacy of Ted Cruz. And so, if you had a particular type of cat, that kind of cat might pop up in an ad. Or if you had, actually, we don't really know at what level, how granular it was, because the ads would appear and then they would vanish. There was in October, the day of the presidential debate, the Trump campaign tried over 150,000 different ads in one day, just testing them, constantly testing them and pushing people in new ways. And the main message that they were promoting to, they had two groups that they were doing most of their marketing to, apparently. One was African Americans, and the main message to them was Hillary Clinton's super predator comment, and she's not really your friend. And the other was what they call weak Democrats. This was a naked voter suppression effort, both of these. They were very clear about it, in fact. And what they tried to say to the weak Democrats, that is people who had voted either both Democratic and Republican or just, voted every other election or only occasionally voted, the message to them was both parties are the same. There's no difference between the two. And therefore, why bother voting? And that actually worked. I mean, they looked at some of the neighborhoods around Wisconsin that Trump carried by 27,000 votes, the whole state. And they found that the vote, just in Milwaukee, was down by almost 50,000 people. One of the cities that they had very heavily targeted with the campaign. So it's very effective. But then that information also, gets sold to other people who use it in other ways. If you want to, you're going to call a company to complain about a product or service, or a company is offering a sale on, and they say they'll beat anybody's price. Well, there's companies that will tell them what websites you've visited in the last few hours, and it'll be instantaneous. When they get your phone number, they know who you are, and boom, they've got your browsing history. And if you've been browsing their competitors, you might be on hold for an hour before you talk to somebody to tell them that you found a better price, and they have to match it. Or that you have a complaint that you want to discuss with them, or whatever it may be. And on the other hand, if their little sensor system tells them that you'd be a great customer and you've got lots of disposable income, and they should jump on it, then they'll answer the phone right away. So it's and that's just the smallest thing. There's companies that sell this information to landlords, companies that sell this information to employers, companies that sell this information to retail stores. One of our big drugstore chains for about 6 or 7 years was using this kind of back office or back end information and tied it to a facial recognition software. Excuse me.
Bless you.
Pardon me. I'm sorry.
Allergies.
And tied it to, it's, I guess it's spring. They tied it to facial recognition software. So the minute you walked into the store, before that little helper walked over to see what you needed, they knew all about you. They knew who you were and what you were probably there for, and whether you are a good customer or a bad customer, or whether you returned goods in the past, or whether they should follow you around the store or whatever. And again, you can see that there might be reasonable, might not be unreasonable. I mean, if you were a landlord, you'd want to know if the person who's applying to rent from you, let their dog tear up the last house, or if the person who's coming into your retail store is a chronic shoplifter. But the level of data and the granularity of the data, while right now we don't have a whole lot of evidence of it being abused in just wildly awful ways, the potential for that is startling.
Well,
and at some point, people need to start regulating this.
Well, you have 4 pages in your book of data points, and that was just based on the 2014 investigation of the Federal Trade Commission, one of which was your purchase history for allergies and arthritis. And, there are 4 pages of data points there, and it gives a whole nother definition to stalking in my mind. It's very creepy. Pettis, do you have a question for Thom?
Yeah, thanks, Jill. I was going to mention the data points that are listed in your book. Thom, you've done another just fabulous job in this current iteration of your line of books. Just really phenomenal job. I did watch The Great Hack that you mentioned, which I would recommend to our audience. It's a Netflix documentary that's really describing some of what you were talking about, particularly with Cambridge Analytica. So I think that there's more to come on this, but I'd like to just come back and maybe talk a little bit more of the last campaign and what Trump has done as a part of his rise to power, if you will, and what he continues to do with his encouragement to run in 2024. Can you talk a little bit about what his connection to surveillance and how these data points have been used and what he's tried to do in terms of undermining the ability to for the nation to really surveil appropriately?
Well, I think what I mentioned about how they use this information to micro target people. That was an extraordinarily effective campaign, and it's going to go down in the history books, as you pointed out. Beyond that, this is the kind of information that they can use when they're trying to figure out how they're going to market their candidate, and what kind of sales pitch he's going to make in his speeches and things like that. Was there something more granular that you were looking for, Pettis?
Yeah, I was thinking about your
straightforward
discussion about how he really undermined the ability for our surveillance systems in the U.S. By moving people out of particular positions and those kinds of things. His destructive force.
Yeah, that's a whole different thing. So back in 2010, as I recall, we attacked Iran with a Stuxnet virus, us in Israel, or at least so the newspapers say, and we got this virus into their centrifuges and destroyed their centrifuges. So Iran that year went from having a $73 million a year cybersecurity budget to having $1 billion a year cybersecurity budget. Hired tens of thousands of people to work on cybersecurity. It became the fourth largest cyber army in the world. And then Shelley Adelson made some crack about, the former, he's passed away now, but the former owner of the Sands Hotel in Las Vegas and, Republican mega donor and Trump mega supporter. And he made a comment about how, if Iran kept misbehaving, we should just set off a nuke in the desert outside Tehran. And so Iran hacked his hotel and turned every computer in it into a brick. I mean, just killed them all. And all that was left was a picture of Adelson and Netanyahu on the screen with a slogan that said, "Don't let your tongue cut your throat." And then they came after a town in Oregon here. There's a dam just upriver of Pineville, the Arthur Bowman Dam. And if that dam was opened, it would have killed hundreds of thousands of people downriver if it was open quickly. And they hacked into a Bowman Dam, but it wasn't the one in Oregon. It was the one in New York State, which is just on a small creek. And so they didn't do the damage that they thought they'd do. But when those two things got publicized, President Obama was president, and he immediately put together a cybersecurity office within the White House. They got office space over at the Eisenhower office building next door, put a guy named Daniels in charge of it, had a staff of 22, started an office within the Department of Homeland Security of cybersecurity. And, of course, the military was gearing up as well. And proposed legislation that would have required all of the private for-profit companies in America that run our critical infrastructure. About half of your electricity comes from publicly owned utilities, but about half of it comes from privately owned for-profit companies. And for example, the electric grid, the nuclear power plants, most of this stuff has now been privatized over the last 40 years. Since Reagan really started that trend. And septic systems, water systems, just right across the board, and so Obama proposed legislation, and it was passed out of the House of Representatives, that would have required them to harden their cybersecurity infrastructure because they're critical. I mean, if any of them fail, it could kill people. Republicans, however, filibustered that in the Senate. So that bill, they said it was too expensive. It was too much of a burden to put on private enterprise, and that's not the job of government. So that legislation died. And so, Obama did as much as he could by executive order in creating this agency. Well, when Donald Trump comes into office, one of the first things he does is he shuts down the White House Office of Cybersecurity and lays off everybody. And then toward the end of his presidency, he even fired the guy, Chris, I'm forgetting his last name, who was the cybersecurity czar. The guy in charge of it for the Department of Homeland Security, fired him too. And what we learned was that by the second or third year of Trump's presidency, after having shut down our cybersecurity offices, the Russians were inside, for sure, the Commerce Department and the Treasury Department, and God only knows what else they got inside. I mean, Biden is still dealing with this, still dealing with the wreckage of Trump's sabotage of our ability to keep Russia out of our government computers.
We are listening to our bold guest, Thom Hartmann, discussing his newest book, The Hidden History of Big Brother, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. In addition, if you'd like to be added to our news group, you may text Be Bold America to 22828. Text Be Bold America to 22828. And thank you to those who've done so already. It is so rewarding to see new people join our list. It just takes a second. We'll be back in 2 minutes right after the High Tower commentary on Should We Trust Corporations to Save Our Democracy? Ha! Just kidding. I'm your host, Jill Cody.
Corporate CEOs are mostly sedentary, well-heeled money people who would hardly be considered athletic. Yet, every now and then, a few of these soft elites bust out as championship players of an old game called Duck and Dodge. It's a sport of political finesse, played when social conditions reach a boiling point, threatening problems for the corporate order. In such moments, executives sometimes leap forward as social activists, claiming to side with the aggrieved. Ducking and dodging their own responsibility for the grievances, these corporate players insist that they will fix the system. But when public attention drifts, so do the fixers, returning to business as usual. Remember a year ago, for example, when our very democracy was under siege, not only by seditious right-wing extremist groups that stormed the U.S. Capitol, but also by a clique of pusillanimous right-wing Congress critters who joined the coup attempt. Outrageous, shouted members of the corporate establishment, pledging that they would save our democracy. How? By cutting off the huge campaign donations that they'd been giving to those 147 Republican lawmakers who voted to overturn the election. But wait, these born-again democracy champions are the very same corporations that use special interest cash to purchase lawmakers wholesale and steal the people's political power. Yet now they want us to believe they're our saviors? Sure enough, they quickly reverted to their true selves. Within weeks of so sternly chastising the seditious members of Congress, the corporate donors quietly returned to lavishing bribery bucks on them. Some 700 corporate phonies slipped $2.4 million in donations last year to members of Congress they were publicly condemning as un-American. This is Jim Hightower saying, it'd make more sense to trust a coyote to guard your last lamb chop than to think that corporations value anything but their own profit. The Hightower Radio Lowdown is made possible by you lowdowners who subscribe to our monthly newsletter, The Hightower Lowdown. You know who you are. Thank you.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Thom Hartmann. Listen to his #1 progressive talk show on SiriusXM, on Patreon, on Free Speech TV, on his podcast, and right here on KSQD 90.7 FM, Monday through Friday at 4 p.m. Visit ThomHartmann.com or reach him at Twitter at Thom_Hartmann. Our topic is The Hidden History of Big Brother, How the Death of Privacy and the Rise of Surveillance Threaten Us and Our Democracy. Now, Thom, this next question may be more granular than what we've been talking about so far, but it really hit me when I was reading the book, is what happens when we hook our phone into the car, the vehicle data extraction kits, because I find it very convenient to have my phone connected so that if somebody calls while I'm driving, I can answer that. So can you just tell us a little bit what happens when we connect our phone to the car?
Yeah, some of this, by the way, I should put a caveat on this. It has changed since I wrote the book a year ago. I mean, it just got published, but and that is that the Apple iPhone operating system now, before it will allow a car to drain your phone of the data, will ask you, do you trust this car? That was not the case a while ago. I'm not sure exactly when, but I don't. Frankly, I don't know if that's the case with Android phones or not. But in the book, I talk about how these smart cars they want to get your contact lists and your addresses and your phone numbers so that if somebody calls, the car can say, oh, it's Jill calling, or what, or you can say to the car, take me to Ralph's house, and it knows where Ralph's house is. The problem is that, particularly cars that are more than a year or two old, the more modern ones have this is not quite as serious a problem. But if you plug a phone in to get power, now if you get it out of the cigarette lighter, no problem. But if you plug it into one of the USB ports in the car, then the car just goes, oh, hello, and sucks that data down. And there was a story in the book about this I think he was an Uber driver who found like 70 different people's contact lists in his car. I mean, in the computer in his car. And it's a potential problem.
Well, it's I have a 2014, so I have a feeling the previous owner's information is there, my information is there, and so on. It's just phenomenal. And also smart television, people are being listened to through Alexa and smart TVs. And any thought on all of that smart technology and what it's doing to our privacy?
Well, this is the deal that the companies have made with us is, if you had a digital thermostat a decade or more ago, you may remember that you could program them to, at 6 p.m. do this, or at 7 p.m., heat it up or cool it down. Not particularly sophisticated programming, but you could program them, and they would just run inside your house, and that was it. It's pretty damn hard to find those kinds of thermostats anymore because all the thermostat companies want to hook you up to their servers on the internet so that they know, when you go to bed and when you get up, and if you have any medical condition that might cause you to, adjust the thermostat a lot, menopause, things like this, or some kinds of cancer treatments. It's all just more data for your profile. And now the companies that make smart beds are requiring you to hook up to their server if you want to see, any kind of information about your smart bed. Or you've got a doorbell company that's hooking neighbors together and then tying them into the police department. And the police departments are using facial recognition software in many places. So, it's like they know who you are. They know when you come home. They know when you leave. They know who comes to visit you. They know how long they stayed there. I mean, everything. It's just nuts. It's just nuts. But this is what we pay for free things. Now, if this is the cost of a search engine, I get it. But it's not necessary to have that level of intrusiveness for a smart bed or for a doorbell or for a security camera. And by and large, Americans increasingly don't have the option to make those kind of choices.
Hey, Pettis, have a question?
I do. I wear a fitness watch. When I was reading your book, I started thinking about all of the medical connections that we're inches away from making. Here in Washington, your vaccinations are posted in a site so you can actually look them up. So it seems as though we're paying for this connectivity out of our pockets that are then used by corporate America and other surveillance agencies to keep track of us and to know more and more about us. I want to talk a little bit about Reagan's attack on antitrust because it kind of paved the way, I think, for these mega companies to exist and for the things we're talking about today to actually occur. Would you mind talking a little bit about Reagan and Michael Friedman, whose name comes up regularly from the Chicago School of Business, and what they've done to kind of pave the way for what we're seeing today?
Yeah, and this is actually my next book. It's The Hidden History of Neoliberalism, how Reaganism gutted America. And you're absolutely right. Milton Friedman was right there cheering it on. In fact, he's the godfather of it all. Up until the early 1980s, if you went into just any random town in America, you pretty much knew where you were. You would see the local bank named after the town or the hotel, or you'd see family names on businesses. I remember in the 60s there was a TV show called Route 66 with George Maharis and the other guy, they traveled in their Corvette from New York to L.A. as I recall along Route 66. There was this is before the interstate highway system was completed, and every single week they'd be in a different town, and every town had its own unique character and nature and everything. So in '83, Reagan instructed the Federal Trade Commission and the Justice Department to basically stop enforcing the antitrust laws. And within a year or so, the Supreme Court had gone along with that. They were all following a new antitrust policy that Robert Bork had been selling since the late 50s, that had up until that time been thought of as just a complete crackpot thing. And that is why, and no president since Reagan has gone back to enforcing antitrust laws. The last president to do that, really in a big way, was Richard Nixon, who initiated the breakup of AT&T, which ended during the Carter administration. So the consequence is that now you could jump out of an airplane from 60,000 feet and land in any random place in America and look around and have no friggin' clue where you are, because all the restaurants are TGI Fridays or all the hotels are Marriotts or Hyatts, and all the banks are Wells Fargo's, and all the clothing stores are Macy's, and it's just there's literally not a single industry in America that hasn't become basically a monopoly. The technical word is oligopoly, which is where you have 4 or 5 companies that control a marketplace and basically work together to do that. And we're seeing this right now with this inflation that we're seeing. The oil companies last year had their most profitable year in history. And the last quarter actually was their most profitable quarter in history. And what are they doing? They're jacking up our prices. The airlines are starting to jack up our prices. Big Pharma has been robbing us blind for years. There's not an industry left in America of any consequence that isn't controlled by fewer than 5 companies, 5 or fewer companies. And that includes internet service providers, and that includes your search engines, and that includes your social media, to bring it all back to this digital stuff. And with regard to social media, there was one huge change that happened in 1996, and that was prior to 1996. Actually, let me establish the frame here. If you were Pettis, if you were to put a sign out in front of your house that said "Big Party Saturday Night, all are welcome," and just left the front door open, and just sat in your living room as all kinds of weird and skeezy people came in, and awful stuff was happening in your house. There was, somebody in the back room getting beat up, and somebody in the other bedroom getting raped, and somebody over in the corner shooting up heroin, and just terrible stuff going on. And the police come in, they would drag you off along with all those criminals. Because you had facilitated it. It was your house, and you invited them in, and you didn't stop them from committing these crimes. That is a crime in and of itself. Always has been. Back to the 10th century. This is like British common law. And, it derives out of the Castle Doctrine. And so in 1996, what happened was Congress passed a law called the Telecommunications Act of 1996, and it had a provision in it called Section 230 that said that's all still true about your house. If you invite people into your house or into your place of business and they commit crimes and you know it, and you don't call the police or stop them, you go to jail too. But if you build a house on the internet, you can invite in the skeeziest people, the worst people. You can bring in the pedophiles, you can bring in the pornographers, you can bring in the drug dealers. It doesn't matter. You can bring in the Nazis. You can anything you want. and there will be no consequence to you whatsoever. You have immunity. Now, in 1981, I started running forums for CompuServe. Nigel Peacock and I, he's my partner in this, and he's still our webmaster. And Nigel and I ran like 30 different forums, one for IBM users, one for Macintosh users, one for UFO aficionados, one for people who had kids with ADHD, one for JFK assassination fans. And they paid us really well. We had a staff of 30, 40 people. And right up until 1996, because we had to double check, we had to check every single post that went on CompuServe, or develop trusted lists of people where we didn't have to just check their every post, but we knew that who they were. And in 1996, when this law passed, CompuServe said, "Okay, we're not going to pay you guys anymore," and that was the beginning of basically Mark Zuckerberg becoming one of the richest people in the world, and that is a problem that is not just people like me, progressives, talking about. Probably one of the better books on this topic was written by Josh Hawley, and complaining about Section 230. And so I think that there's a growing bipartisan consensus that something needs to be done. The problem is that the Supreme Court has said that, very wealthy people and big corporations can own politicians, and that's no longer called bribery. It's called First Amendment protected free speech. And so you've got all these companies that are, out of one side of their mouth saying, we need to fix this, we need regulation, and then out of the other side of their mouth, they're just making a fortune, making money hand over fist, throwing parties for skeezy people.
Oh my. That is an excellent analogy. And in your title of your book, you talk about the rise of surveillance that threatens us in our democracy, and surveillance and social control, where when we're watched, we change our behavior, and social cooling. Like Don't Say Gay bill in Florida, or the teachers have to wear microphones or cameras, and that will keep people from start self-censoring themselves. And then right now in China, they're rolling out a system that ranks its citizens based on their social credit. People can be punished if they drive badly or buy too many video games. And it's not unified nationwide system yet, but they plan to do that to make it mandatory eventually. And between our surveillance and the other, where we are now, and then the extreme where in China, do you think Big Brother would be in control of just about everything, that we might be assigned a citizenship score like they're doing in China?
I think the social credit score in China, which can determine whether a dating service will take you on, whether you can get a reservation in a hotel or a restaurant, whether you get priority treatment at the hospital or from your doctor's office, whether you or your kids can get decent jobs or go to good schools, based on a whole spectrum of behavior that goes way beyond whether you bounce a check. And one of the ways that you can get back into good graces is by publicly praising the government on social media. I think that system is a cautionary tale for us. That's what we don't want to do.
We don't want that.
That's the warning, right? That's the warning of where we don't want to go. And frankly, there is this thing called social cooling, and there are times when you actually want it. And that is, we all have, and by we all, I mean literally every animal that you've ever met, human or otherwise, has this thing called social cooling, which is that we alter our behavior when we're observed. I mean, people who have pets, cats or dogs, can tell you about this. They don't jump up on the counter when you're standing there. They wait until you leave the room. And that's social cooling, right? When you're standing there, you're looking at them, and it's down-regulating their behavior. And, when the advent of smartphones, when everybody had a phone in their pocket, that's when down in Florida they noticed that the summer break or spring break parties started getting had a different quality to them as a result of that, because nobody wanted to get videotaped, or it's not even tape anymore, but you know what I mean. And so but like I said, there are times when you want a certain amount of this, like for example, police wearing body cameras. You want them to feel like they're being observed, because we have so many examples of when they can do things in secret. They do things that are not. Occasionally, they do things that are not legal, moral, ethical, appropriate. Whatever the proper word is. But this idea that when we're being observed, we alter our behavior is a really important one. And people will say, "Oh, I've got nothing to fear, and I've got nothing to hide," and all that kind of stuff. And of course, the glib answer is, "Well, then let me set up a camera in your bathroom or in your bedroom." and suddenly they're like, "Well, I didn't mean that." But you probably already have a camera in your bathroom or your bedroom. I mean, if you ever have your smartphone in there, if you've got a laptop in there, if you've got a smart speaker in there, then the smart speaker doesn't have the camera there; it has the microphone. Then you're already there. So.
Well, at this point, we want to ask what listeners could keep doing, stop doing, and start doing. And I know in your book you talk about breaking up the Big Brother internet behemoths. What can we do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think that some of these companies have gotten so large that they're basically toxic, and I can say that right across the board. I mean, I think you and I talked about one of my books, The Hidden History of American Monopolies.
Yes. Yes.
And that's very much a reality with regard to this internet space that needs to be dealt with. Is breaking up some of these big companies. Number one. Number two, we need to reverse Reagan and Trump and Ajit Pai's destruction of net neutrality. Prior to the Trump presidency, internet communications were governed in the United States, as they are in every other developed country in the world, under what we called Title II of the Telecommunications Act of the 1930s, as I recall. It might even be the late 1920s, but it was around that era. And, as telephones were becoming ubiquitous, at least in cities, and the law says that the only way that the police, the guy down the street, or the phone company itself can listen into your phone conversations is if some judge issues a warrant. In other words, it's a guaranteed right to privacy on the telephone. And that was also true of the Internet. And then Donald Trump put this guy, Ajit Pai, who was a former lawyer for Verizon, put him in charge of the FCC, and Ajit Pai destroyed that, just ended net neutrality. So now your internet service provider, the company that brings the internet into your home, can literally see everything you do. They can see every website you visit. They can see every keystroke you type. They can read every email you get, every email you send. They know how slowly or rapidly you scroll down a page and what pictures or ads you stop or slow down at. I mean, they literally are watching everything you do. And have the ability to store and sell this information because there are no rules anymore. Ajit Pai and Donald Trump just blew those up. So, number one, you can use what's called a virtual private network, a VPN, which will get around your local internet provider and put you on the internet without your internet service provider snooping on you. But you want to be sure not to get one of the free ones because the free ones, they just spy on you and sell your information.
Because it's free, so you pay them with your data.
Yeah. That's right. It's the old saying: if the product is free, then you're the product.
You're the product.
So there's some good VPNs out there, and do your homework on it. But you want one that just explicitly says, including in their fine print, that they do not record any of the activity that goes through their VPN. That's number one. Number two, of course, we should restore net neutrality. We should restore the privacy. I mean, it's so ironic. If you're walking down the street with your smartphone and you have a phone conversation with somebody and it's bouncing off a cell tower, then that conversation is protected. Nobody can listen in on it without a warrant from a judge. But if you are looking at something on your phone, if you're checking your email, if you're browsing the web, then the same cell tower, the same cell phone company knows absolutely everything you're doing because that's now data. And Ajit Pai created this distinction between data and telephone calls. So,
and we have 1 minute left, Thom. So what could be the last? What could people start doing?
Well, there's those things on the individual level. Just start being very, very careful about where you go and the websites you go to, and don't click on crazy links that come to you in email. And,
or a text. Clicking on links and texts that you don't know. That's right.
Even the ones that you think you do know. And this is one of the big new scams now. You get a text from Apple or from Microsoft or from your bank, and it says click here, and you click on it, and boom, now they've got your phone. So be careful.
Well, I also wanted to quickly say that Consumer Reports has an article on how to turn off your smart TV snooping. And and that Credo is a telecommunication company, a nonprofit telecommunication company you can change your cell phone to, and they don't snoop on you either. Thom, thank you for being our bold and impressive guest today. This hour just flew by.
You did. Thank you, Thom.
We appreciate you so much.
Thank you.
And what you
It was
do.
a pleasure being with both of you.
Thank you. And thank you for writing another exceptional book in your Hidden History series. And I just recommend any of them and all of them to listeners. Up next on Be Bold America on Sunday, March 27th at 5 p.m. will be Can Police Move from a Warrior Mentality to a Guardianship Mindset? Authoritarianism is antithetical to democracy. The January 6th storming of the U.S. Capitol, the invasion of Ukraine, the militarization of police in many of our cities are living examples of authoritarianism in action. Are there any similarities between them? Our two upcoming guests, Dr. William Benet, creator of the Polarities of Democracy Theory, Dr. Joseph McMillan, former president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives, say yes, there are similarities. They say residents often feel as though the police are occupying force rather than helpful servants of the people in those communities. So join us on Sunday, March 27th at 5 p.m. to talk about challenging police officers to change their minds. I also want to give a special thank you to Be Bold America's program engineer, Emily Donham, and to our program director, Howard Feldstein, and again to our bold and very impressive guest, Thom Hartmann. You're listening to KSQD Santa Cruz, Many Voices, One Station. Listen worldwide online at ksqd.org. Stay tuned for Intersections with Seth Shapiro. My name is Jill Cody.
And I'm Dr. Pettis Perry.
And thank you for listening to Be Bold America. Until next time, keep, stop, start.